Túpac Katari was not born into royalty. He didn't inherit palaces or command soldiers from birth. He came from the highlands of what is now Bolivia, raised in the shadow of mountains and beneath the weight of Spanish colonial rule. Born in 1750 as Julián Apasa Nina, he was Aymara, a people whose dignity had been shattered, whose lands were stolen, and whose labor fueled an empire. He witnessed a world where his people were forced to carry goods on their backs for Spanish elites, taxed until they starved, and conscripted into deadly labor in the silver mines of Potosi. The Spanish crown saw them not as human beings, but as a resource to be exhausted. But something burned within Julián, and in time, he would give that fire a name. He called himself Túpac Katari, blending the legacy of two indigenous revolutionaries, Túpac Amaru II, the Quechua leader fighting in Peru, and Túpac Katari, a fellow Aymara rebel. By fusing their names, he was making a declaration. He was not one man, but the continuation of a struggle centuries in the making. He would be the voice of the Andes, the rage of the oppressed, the memory of civilizations buried but never broken. Before he was a revolutionary, Katari was a weaver. His trade allowed him to travel, to connect with other indigenous communities, to hear their stories of suffering and strength. Through markets and trails, he built a network. But beneath the daily transactions of goods, there was something deeper being exchanged: solidarity, anger, and the longing to rise. Katari became more than a man. He became a symbol passed by whispers across valleys, a promise that one day the mountains would roar back. In 1780, as the revolution led by Túpac Amaru II erupted in Peru, Katari and his wife Bartolina Sisa ignited their own uprising across the Bolivian highlands. They gathered tens of thousands of Aymara and Quechua people, farmers, artisans, elders, and youth, and forged them into a movement, not a paid army, but a people rising as one. Their target was La Paz, the colonial stronghold of Spanish power in the region. It was there that the elites, the clergy, the mine owners, and the colonial governors operated with brutal efficiency, extracting wealth and enforcing silence. Katari's army surrounded La Paz in 1781. The siege lasted more than 6 months, one of the longest sustained indigenous uprisings in all of the Americas. He and Bartolina Sisa orchestrated a blockade that cut off all food, supplies, and reinforcements. The city, once so confident in its power, began to rot from the inside. Hunger took root. Fear took hold. The colonizers who had wielded power so casually now found themselves begging the very people they had once enslaved. But Katari was not driven by cruelty. He enforced discipline among his troops, banning looting, respecting elders, and commanding with moral clarity. Bartolina Sisa was no less fierce. She led thousands of warriors, held strategic positions, and kept the siege's logistics running with precision. Their leadership shattered colonial stereotypes of savagery. This was a rebellion of order, intelligence, and revolutionary purpose. Still, the siege could not last forever. The Spanish crown dispatched reinforcements, and betrayal from within weakened Katari's positions. He was eventually captured and brought to La Paz in chains. The Spanish elite wanted to make an example of him. They tied his limbs to 4 horses and ordered them to gallop in opposite directions. His body was torn apart, but his spirit would not be silenced. His final words echoed through history. "I will return, and I will be millions." This wasn't a metaphor, it was a prophecy, and it came true. Bartolina Sisa was captured shortly after. She was tortured, publicly humiliated, and hanged. The Spanish tried to crush the revolution by mutilating its leaders, but they only succeeded in immortalizing them. The blood of Túpac Katari and Bartolina Sisa did not vanish into the soil. It flowed into the roots of mountains and seeded a revolution that would bloom again and again. What made Katari so dangerous to the Spanish wasn't just his military strategy, it was his vision. He imagined a world where indigenous people governed themselves, where Aymara and Quechua languages rang in the halls of leadership, where women like Bartolina Sisa stood at the front lines of justice. He dreamed of a future where the descendants of the Incas would not bow to European kings, where children would be taught their ancestors' names instead of their conquerors. His war was not only against an empire, but against erasure. After his death, the Spanish tried to erase him. They banned his name, destroyed any written accounts that honored him, and executed those who dared invoke his memory. But the people remembered. In whispers and songs, in hidden rituals and sacred sites, Katari's story survived. And when Bolivia finally gained independence, his spirit was already there, woven into the land, rising in the breath of every indigenous person who refused to be broken. In the 20th century, his name re-emerged with force. Guerrilla movements invoked Katari's legacy in their fight against neo-colonialism. Indigenous activists carried his image in marches. In 2005, Evo Morales, Bolivia's first indigenous president, declared himself a spiritual heir to Katari. Streets and schools were named after him. Statues were raised not to a man, but to a movement he inspired. The satellite that brought Bolivia into the digital age was named Túpac Katari, a symbol that his voice would now travel farther than ever before. But monuments are not enough. Katari's true legacy lives in action. Every time an indigenous language is spoken with pride, he returns. Every time sacred land is defended against corporate extraction, he rides again. Every time a woman like Bartolina Sisa is remembered not as a victim, but as a warrior, the prophecy breathes. Túpac Katari didn't return as a man. He returned as a movement, as land reclamation, as education reform, as protest, as memory. His story is not confined to Bolivia. Across the Americas, from Canada to Chile, indigenous peoples rise today in battles for sovereignty, dignity, and justice. And in each uprising, his spirit lingers, watching, guiding, reminding us that no empire is eternal. There's a reason his name was feared. He was not simply fighting colonizers, he was fighting forgetting. He knew that the most dangerous weapon the Spanish had was not the musket or the whip, but the rewriting of history. And so he made himself unforgettable. He taught us that revolution is not a moment, but a continuum, that every act of resistance, no matter how small, echoes through generations, that no people, no matter how silenced or shattered, are ever truly gone. As long as memory survives, so does possibility. Túpac Katari was not just a rebel. He was a mirror held up to a broken world. And in that reflection he offered something rare. Hope sharpened by rage, love carved by loss, and freedom lit by fire. Follow for more history they never taught us in school.